Uh, Turn off. And, all right. So now we're going to talk about moral egoism as a moral theory. Um, so the first thing to mention is that it's helpful to be aware of two different kinds of egoistic theory. Uh, I mean, both of them have like their own issues, but one's a psychological theory about people, and another is a moral theory about how you should act. So psychological egoism can is a sort of like a scientific claim really about people, and it says that people are basically selfish. Uh, or to put it another way, people only care about themselves. They only act for their own benefit. And yeah, obviously that can come in various strengths. You can say it's true most of the time, or you can say it's true all of the time. So like the most extreme view is like that nobody ever did anything which was unselfish. That seems obviously the more extreme version of the theory, the less plausible it is. Obviously, we can think of all sorts of cases where it looks like people are unselfish. You know, you can think about firefighters, people who sign up for, to be in the army. You can think of parents who sacrifice themselves for their kids. You can think of uh, soldiers who will throw themselves on top of a bomb in order to protect their buddies. I mean, there seem to be all sorts of cases where people act unselfishly. Uh, so the claim that people are always selfish seems pretty implausible. Uh, but maybe the claim that on the whole people are basically selfish, that's a much more plausible claim, a more moderate version of the psychological egoist claim. All right. So that's the psychological claim. Now, the moral claim is a claim about how you should behave. And moral egoism says it's good to be selfish. And again, that's going to come in various strengths, and we'll look at the various strengths of those claims as we go along. So, like I was just saying, I think a moderate version of psychological egoism is relatively kind of intuitively plausible. Maybe it's more plausible in some places than others. I mean, I would say that when you look at how humans behave, it seems like people are pretty self-motivated. Um, right. So now we talked about. I just mentioned like stuff like firefighters and soldiers. Uh, if you're a diehard psychological egoist, um, you might say, well, people who make self-sacrifices, they're making a sort of calculated risk, and there can be a payoff for living a life which is helping other people. For example, maybe helping other people makes you happier. Or maybe if you make self-sacrifices, you will get rewards later on. Maybe, I mean, why do parents make all those sacrifices for their kids? Well, maybe they're doing it on the basis that their kids are going to look after them in their old age. So maybe that's the reason that parents make self-sacrifices. Um, Maybe firefighters kind of rush into burning buildings because they figure that it makes them look brave, and then people like them more. Uh, Maybe kind of cops are cops because, well, it gives them, there are risks involved with being a cop, but maybe on the other hand, it gets them certain rewards. Cops have good pensions, uh, and um, and they get a lot of social respect. So maybe like the apparent counterexamples to psychological egoism, maybe if you're a diehard psychological egoist, you can kind of you have to be sort of pretty cynical about people. You say, well, the reason that people are doing those things of self, the reason people are making self-sacrifices is actually because they're selfish. It's a pretty cynical view, right? So you have to be sort of cynical about people's motivations. Uh, this is a question about, well, what's the truth? Can psychology settle this? If surely psychological researchers should be able to do experiments to try and work out if people are selfish or not. Actually, there's actually quite a lot of debate about the psychological literature, and it turns out it's quite difficult to really settle the issue. So that's a sort of ongoing debate. Fortunately, for our purposes, we don't really need to settle the psychological debate. We're mainly interested in the moral question. Now, in terms of the moral question about extreme moral egoism says you should always just care about yourself and you should never care about anybody else. And you should never help a stranger in need unless it's going to be good for you. There are all sorts of thought experiments you can perform, or just you think about real life. So one sort of thought experiment which is often used is like imagine that you are walking down the street. Maybe it's kind of late at night, and you see a toddler, like a 2 or 3 year old, maybe a 2 year old, on the side of the street. And the toddler's crying. And you look around and you don't see any other people around. Uh, Extreme moral egoism would say, just keep on walking. Because whatever you do, it's going to probably be more effort for you, and therefore you should, anything which is a cost for you is not something that's in your interest, therefore you shouldn't do it. But what could you do? Well, I mean, you could, at the bare minimum, you could pull out your phone, you could like dial 911 and say, there's a toddler sitting on the street here, and then like probably some cops would come and get it. Or maybe at a slightly higher level of effort, you could pick up the toddler and you could take it to the nearest police station, or take it to a hospital or something like that. Or you could just hand it to somebody else and say, you deal with it. But I mean, you could do something to protect the life of the toddler, right? And it seemed that that would be very low effort. So extreme moral egoism would say, do nothing. And it's like, well, that's like just misunderstanding morality. That's not the morally right thing to do. So all of our kind of moral intuitions, all of our understanding of morality says like, well, that is a very implausible approach to morality. But we can imagine a moderate moral egoism. And a moderate moral egoism would say something like this. You should put yourself and those you love above others. That you don't have any obligation to strangers, uh, whereas you do have an obligation to yourself and the people you love. So I think that that's a kind of moderate view. Uh, it says you have an obligation to make your own life good. Yeah, I mean, that's more plausible. Uh, and it says you can have an interest in your family's future, the interest of those you love, or they're often like an extension of your own interest. People think of like their family as some ways part of themselves. I think I mean that's especially true of parents and children. Um, but it can be true to some extent of your siblings, and certainly people will think of as true of their like romantic partners. They say, they say like, we're one unit. There's two people living as one. Therefore, your partner's interests are your interest. It's like one of the main ideas of moderate moral egoism is like you don't have any positive obligation to strangers. You may have an obligation not to hurt strangers, but you don't have an obligation to help strangers. Right? So that's a much more moderate view than extreme moral egoism. Right? So uh, when people talk about moral egoism, generally they say moral egoism is a kind of consequentialism, maximizing the good consequences for yourself. And yeah, certainly it seems like it's possible you could think of moderate moral egoism as that kind of theory. Um, but I don't necessarily think that that's the only way you have that moral egoism would make any sense. I mean, in fact, the way I just set it out, I kind of set it out more as like kind of a list of kind of rules or duties or something like that, rather than setting it out as a consequentialist view. So it seems like you could think of moderate moral egoism as a bunch of moral rules, and so I think it's compatible with that too. Or you might think of it as in terms of virtue ethics, and think of it in terms of a virtue ethics view, and you'd say one of the main virtues is to make your own life better and to care for the people you love. Right? So it seems like that it could be, you could see it as a virtue ethics view also. So just to kind of expand that idea a little more, if you're thinking about it in terms of virtue ethics, you'd say here are the virtues: care for yourself, work for your own self-interest, kind of broadly construed. Often there's going to be times when working, say if you're in a family or you have close friends, often what's good for your friends or good for your family is good for you. So then you'd expand it for those people too. You'd say, yeah, you need to develop yourself. You need to enrich your own life. You need to live your life to the full. But also, you need to kind of care for your own family, and you can nurture your own family. And then friends. And it's not just friends. So it's not just family, it's also your friends. Your friends are very important to you, especially your close friends. And so we'd say like it's good to care for your friends and do what's good for your friends. And you might say, well, there are other parts of a moderate moral egoist view. You say, justice is good. Treating being fair to others is good. That may not be your top priority. There may be cases where you sacrifice justice if something is good for you, and moderate moral egoism is going to say, yeah, it's perfectly fine to do what's good for you and sacrifice justice in some cases, but other things being equal, it's good to be fair to other people. And then you would say, like, it's good to help others when it doesn't impact on your duties to self. So thinking back to the case of the toddler, a moderate moral egoist would say, yeah, it's good to help others if it's not going to have a big impact, if it's not going to require lots of self-sacrifice. So it's like a moderate moral egoist virtue ethics is relatively plausible. All right. Uh, So yeah, so this is to kind of summarize the views I've been what I've just been saying. I think you can formulate moral egoism both in terms of moral rules or and in virtue ethics, and they come up pretty much the same. So I'd say that you don't have to think of moral egoism as being in conflict with virtue ethics or in conflict with a duty view or in conflict with a consequentialist view. Rather, you can adapt those views to kind of fit a moral egoist view. So, like, yeah, I gave you a bunch of virtues, and here's a slightly different formulation. You might think in terms of kind of other stuff. You could think of ways in which virtue ethics can be a version of moral egoism, and in terms of moral rules, the stuff like act in your own your own best interest, broadly construed. Respect the considerations of justice and society, and when not against your own interest, it's good to help others. So that moderate moral egoism does not sound crazy. In fact, I would say that um, far from sounding crazy, I think probably that's how many people live. Uh, you know, I would say that many people, very few people are like living like full utilitarians, basing their lives on trying to make society better. Uh, Most people are focused on their own lives and making their own lives better, and also they focus on their families and their friends. So I would suggest that moderate moral egoism is actually quite close to how many people live. Now, one thing I've been kind of highlighting, uh, but at least maybe mentioning, but it's worth highlighting, is this idea that when you're thinking about your own interests, it's often a mistake to think that you have to choose between your interest and other people's interest, because very often your own interest and other people's interest are actually the same. I mean, we are very social animals. We depend on other people. And we're not. I mean, maybe a few people are totally solitary, but most humans very much depend on other humans. Most of us really, we have families we depend on, we have friends we depend on, but more than that, we live in a society, and we depend on other people to kind of be considerate, and other people to, and we're considerate of others. And if it wasn't like that, then our lives would be terrible. So it seems like we depend on others in all sorts of ways. We also depend on others in the sense that we have a government who creates an infrastructure. So there's like roads and public transport and kind of universities and stuff like that. We depend on all those things. So it seems like there's all sorts of social stuff which works for everybody. Uh, so generally, it's possible for our interests to diverge from other people, but a lot of the time, our interests are connected with the interests of other people, and often it makes sense to help others for selfish reasons. That if you help, I mean, in a basic way, like you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. We have these implicit contracts with other people. Now, there are cases of extreme self-sacrifice, which are definitely worth thinking about. And what we want to say about those, and what would a moderate moral egoist say about those cases? So here are a couple which seem to be uh, extreme self-sacrifice. So a soldier who throws himself on a grenade to save his comrades, or a teacher who puts himself or herself in front of a shooter to protect their students. And these things have happened more than once. So what would you say about this thing? Would you say that's admirable? I guess I mean, I think we do sort of have a kind of a respect for those things. What would a moderate moral egoist say about those? I think it's there. It's kind of I would say like if you think about like the list of virtues we could come up with, there's a sort of conflict. Or I mean, you can sort of imagine how a moderate moral egoist would be okay with that. But I think you might say that some moderate moral egoists would say, well, that's kind of crazy. It depends on the case. Now, I think the soldier and the teacher case are actually sort of interesting cases in that, I mean, soldiers, if you have your comrades, there's like a real bond of love between soldiers, right? They think of themselves as brothers or siblings, and so they really care about their buddies. So they really care about the fate of their buddies. And similarly, a teacher, um, I think this is probably more true in K through 12 education, maybe especially for younger kids. You may think, if you think back to your own education, if you think back to your high school teachers, did your high school teachers really care about you? I mean, if you think about back to mine, that's a long time ago, but they sort of cared about me, I would say. I don't think they really thought about me much outside of the classroom. But maybe like for like in elementary school, maybe the elementary school teachers really do like love those little kids. So if a teacher like that sees those kids really in threat, it's much easier to understand that the teacher thinks of those kids as being in some ways like an extension of themselves. So the idea that you would sacrifice yourself in order to protect those kids is partly a kind of self-protection. I mean, what would a moderate moral egoist say about like a more extreme case where somebody sacrifices themselves for somebody they have no connection with whatsoever, somebody they don't care about at all? Something like that, that's a much more extreme scenario. And I think a moderate moral egoist would be, would say, actually, I'm not sure that's the right thing to do, because like really the right thing to do is look after yourself. Now, does that mean that moderate moral egoism is just ridiculous and has absurd conclusions? I would say many of us actually don't have very strong intuitions that it's a really good thing to sacrifice yourself for strangers. You say, well, I mean, maybe it's an okay choice, but many of us would say, well, that's an extreme thing to do, and people may not even be sure it's the right thing to do. Now, one distinction that is very helpful there, I think, for moderate moral egoism, is one that is a little bit implicit in some of the other theories, but is especially important here. And I think is one that we often kind of make in everyday life. It's between like doing what you're morally obliged to do and doing what goes beyond your obligations. Many of us say, look, I'll do my obligations, I'll do what I have to do, But then anything I do above and beyond that, that's extra. I don't have to kind of do a lot of like self-sacrifice for the rest of the world. I'll do my duties. I'm not going to kind of murder people. I'm not going to steal from people. I'm going to help people I encounter who are in a real need. But going above and beyond that, it'd be nice of me to do that, but I don't have a duty to go above and beyond. I think that's a very common way of thinking. And so I think if you're going to try and defend moderate moral egoism, you could say, yeah, that's a good distinction. So that we have duties to ourselves, we have duties to those we love, we have duties to our close friends, because in some ways all those we love are kind of extensions of ourself in some way. Whereas helping strangers, it's nice to help strangers, but you don't have to help a stranger. All right, so if you're a moderate moral egoist, you can say, yeah, it's good to be helping others, and so you don't have to say a moderate moral egoist doesn't have to say they're against that, but they what they can say is like that's just going above and beyond, and you don't have duties to other people. So I'd say that that's a distinction that makes a lot of sense for us and is worth keeping in mind. Now, moderate moral egoism is definitely not a theory you're going to see much defended by ethics books. I mean, if you look in textbooks and stuff like that, most ethics books say, well, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. The most famous writer who has defended a kind of form of moral egoism is Ayn Rand. Who's also associated with political libertarianism. And Ayn Rand kind of argues that she's especially against kind of socialism and against the idea that the state should help those in need. But her arguments tend to, she has all sorts of arguments, often which are not really very well formulated. Partly her arguments are that that a welfare state actually kind of takes away people's autonomy, takes away their ability to run their own lives. It makes them codependent, and is actually much better for people to force people to survive on their own if they are dependent on other people to live, then they're not really living their life to their full, and they're actually holding themselves back. Now, I mean, we can discuss that sort of view. I think the idea that helping other people in need makes them codependent, maybe it's true occasionally, but a lot of the time, no, helping somebody in need just really helps them. So I don't think Ayn Rand's arguments are very convincing most of the time. So the version of modern moral egoism I see is like at least possibly plausible is not one I want to associate with Ayn Rand. But I think it's actually very hard to find a defense of moderate moral egoism out there in kind of the philosophy literature. Does that mean it's any less plausible than any other theory? I would say it's just as plausible as any other moral theory. One thing I'm generally saying is that all of these moral theories are not really easy to defend, and so I'm not sure that moderate moral egoism is any easier to defend or any harder to defend than any other moral theory. I mean, if you think in terms of evidence, I mean, can you prove it? No. I mean, but can you prove any moral theory? No. So it's like there's a kind of question about to what extent we should really kind of take any moral theory seriously. I guess one thing I would say is that the idea that you care for it's natural to care for your group, it's natural to care for yourself and to care for your family and your close friends, that kind of does fit in with a lot of evolutionary psychology, which says that that's how societies kind of thrive, by looking after, by helping those they care about. And like I was saying before, I think it actually fits in pretty well with a lot of people's actual moral attitudes. I think it is often worth making a distinction between what people say they care about and what they actually care about. I mean, I think a lot of people would sort of shy away from saying, oh, yeah, it's great to be selfish. But if you actually look at how people behave, that's pretty much how a lot of people behave. So I think the idea that people are mostly selfish does actually kind of make a lot of sense. All right, so I'm saying there isn't much evidence for this moral theory, but I'm not thinking there's a lot of evidence against it either. Now, one thing to note is, like, certainly moral egoism, especially moderate moral egoism, is a theory about how to live your own personal life. It doesn't seem like you'd want to extend that to how governments should behave. Governments shouldn't behave to be benefiting the government. Rather, we think government should be working to benefit the whole population. And there's different theories about how governments should be benefiting the whole population, but basically, it seems like we definitely think the role of a government is to serve the people. So if a government is just serving the government, then that's a big problem. So you don't want a government to be applied to be using moral egoism for itself. So I think it makes much more sense to say moderate moral egoism is plausible as a theory about how an individual should live their life. It's not plausible about how institutions or governments should live their lives. Now, I think one kind of question to ask yourself is like, well, if you're going to lead your life as a moderate moral egoist, does that make you an asshole? And I guess I use asshole in the sort of technical sense that some other philosophers have talked about. I mean, obviously, assholes are people you don't admire, right? And generally you think of them as nasty people. So if it turned out that moderate moral egoism recommended living life like an asshole, then that would be an implausible theory. But it seems like fairly obvious to me that probably actually a moderate moral egoist is going to recommend against acting like an asshole. Because I mean, like, one thing about assholes is that people don't like them. And we want to be liked. You certainly don't want to be an asshole to your own family or to your friends. So it seems like, and generally I mean, you might think of some notable exceptions, but generally living life like as an asshole makes your life go worse because everybody hates you. Maybe it's complicated because sometimes you can have like some people who hate you and some people who love you, even though you act like that. But it's a bit of a simplification, but generally I would say that people who act very selfishly and don't care about others, their lives don't go well. Generally, your life goes much better if you're considerate, if you are pleasant to other people, and if you're ready to empathize with other people. That makes your own life go better. So it seems like it's moderate moral egoism would say it's probably better not to be an asshole. We might think about, as I mentioned, Ayn Rand previously. So it doesn't seem like moderate moral egoism recommends any particular kind of government. We might ask whether government should demand massive self-sacrifice. Generally, of a government, we don't expect a government to demand massive self-sacrifice, although I guess when you think about governments which do that, I guess some forms of communist government seem to require that. They assume that everything you do is going to be in favor of the collective. But generally, we don't think communism is a very plausible view as kind of saying everybody should just live their life as doing whatever's good for society. Similarly, as I've suggested, I don't think utilitarianism as a view which says that you should always be working to maximize the benefits for society. That's not particularly plausible as a moral theory. We do think that governments can require massive self-sacrifice in emergencies. You know, in a war, you expect everybody to make big self-sacrifice. And as we saw in the pandemic, the government expected us to make self-sacrifice. In fact, a lot of people made, at least for a short time, they made very big self-sacrifices, and they had to kind of do away with their social life. They had to do away with with their businesses to some extent. So sometimes we do expect those are in the extreme cases. Now, one of the reasons we think it's okay to demand big self-sacrifice is precisely because we think it's good. In the end, that's better for the whole of society, and that if people don't make self-sacrifices, then we worry that society could collapse. If during a wartime everybody keeps on just being selfish and thinking about themselves, then you're more likely to lose the war. If during a pandemic everybody just does what's best for them, that's going to be self-defeating because the pandemic will end up killing everybody. So you think it seems like that the reason it's okay to demand short-term self-sacrifice is that in the end it's going to be better for everybody. So it seems like it's okay. You can see how moderate moral egoism is compatible with at least occasionally demanding big self-sacrifices. Now, what about kind of issues of justice and the welfare of society? I mean, obviously, a society is going to need a military, it needs a police force, it needs infrastructure like roads and public transport, waste disposal, public schools. So it seems like a society is going to have to provide those things, and moderate moral egoism will be kind of probably say that seems fine, but it seems probably it's going to say that that's really about how society operates. It's not about you living your own personal life. So I think moderate moral egoism is going to say, yeah, it's good to have society which is just. It's good to have society which is generally better off. But those are not the main considerations for moderate moral egoism. I mean, generally, I would say if we're thinking about how to run society, we want government to be doing what's best for the society as a whole, which is basically a sort of a utilitarian approach to running society. All right. Let's think a little bit about what moderate moral egoism is going to say about like factory farming, abortion, and punishment. Well, so let's start off thinking about factory farming. Well, obviously, if mainly what you care about is yourself and the people you love, then it's probably not going to care much about whether animals suffer or not. Right? So it seems like on the face of it, moderate moral egoism is not going to care much about factory farming. Even if like factory farming involves lots of suffering, it's probably going to say, well, not my concern. Um, on the other hand, as I was saying, like the moderate version of moral egoism does allow for the possibility that you care about the suffering of others so long as it doesn't make a big difference to you. So like, for example, like the toddler on the street, if you see that, it seems like moderate moral egoism is going to say, yeah, it's good to help the toddler out. Now, so there's a question about how big of a self-sacrifice is it to you to give up meat? Would that be a terrible sacrifice? Could you say, oh my God, I can't live life without meat? It turns out, I mean, most vegetarians are perfectly healthy, and they seem perfectly happy. It's rare to find a vegetarian who says, "Oh my God, this is incredibly difficult." Most vegetarians say, "It takes a little getting used to." So maybe you might say that if there is terrible injustice in the world in terms of the treatment of non-humans, and it'll be easy for us to avoid that injustice by not eating meat, then moderate egoism would say, yeah, then it's probably a good idea to not eat meat. You might also think about the effect that factory farming has on society and the climate and the general ecosystem with all the waste from factory farming. And you might say, well, actually, that's making society worse off. And ultimately, although it may not affect me very directly, it could affect my descendants and even my even my kids in the fairly near future. And that might be a reason to discourage factory farming. Now, what about abortion? I think abortion is going to be, again, I think it's going to be a sort of complicated, maybe not very obvious what to say about abortion from the stance of moderate moral egoism. I mean, I guess in the very basic version, like, if having a baby would make your life a lot worse, uh, and your obligations are just to yourself, then it'd be fine to have an abortion. Um, Now you might say, well, could having an abortion be against your own interests? Now, some people who are against abortion say that having an abortion causes all sorts of trauma. Uh, and other people say, well, if you have an abortion, then you're going to go to hell. Uh, or some people say it causes you lots of health problems in the future. If those things were true, then obviously, from the point of view of selfishness, it would be better not to have an abortion. It turns out, actually, I mean, those things, there's no reason to think those things are true. There's no reason to think that having an abortion is especially traumatic. Um, there's no reason to think that most abortions cause you health problems in the future. And there's certainly no reason to think that having an abortion means you're going to go to hell. So it doesn't seem like those are reasons for, in terms of self-interest, to think that you shouldn't have an abortion. So it seems probably that from the point of view of moderate moral egoism, abortion is going to be totally permissible. All right. Now, there is the related issue of infanticide, right? So what if, I mean, generally in our society, I talked about in the toddler, and we tend to think, oh, we should protect babies and toddlers. So what if a parent has a baby, or somebody has a baby and then says, oh, I don't want to have a baby? Would moderate egoism say, oh, it's okay to kill that baby? And if it did, then people would then be pretty quick to say, well, that's an unacceptable moral view. I mean, because any view which says it's okay to kill babies, that seems to be kind of a shocking view. Now, I guess, I mean, so there's tricky things to say about that. I mean, for one thing, it's one thing to have an abortion. It's another thing to for a woman to be pregnant for 9 months, go through with the pregnancy and for it to be born, and then to kill the baby. Seems like that is actually much more likely to be traumatic. I mean, like, see, it just seems like doing that would probably make somebody feel terrible. I mean, like, why is that? Well, because like you form partly is human biology makes you form a strong attachment to the baby that you're giving birth to. So it seems like that could actually is much more likely to be against your own interest because you're just going to feel terrible afterwards. Evolution gives mothers and parents generally strong instincts to protect the newborn. So if you going against those could be quite traumatic. So it might be that killing your own baby could be a form of experienced as a form of self-harm, just a terrible thing. So that would suggest that infanticide would actually be morally wrong because it's going against your own best interests. I mean, it might be complicated in a particular case. And maybe you, if you create a scenario or think of a scenario where your life is going to be much worse having a baby, then maybe the moral egoist view is going to say, well, then maybe it's okay to kill the baby. And we might find that morally abhorrent. I guess the other thing to kind of say about infanticide is like in today's society, we see infanticide as like a terrible evil. It is worth noting that a lot of other civilizations have not seen it as a terrible evil. Back in ancient times, it was fairly common if somebody had a baby and they didn't want it. This is true in like ancient Greece and the ancient Rome. They would take that baby outside of the city walls and take it to the dump and leave it there. And that happened quite a lot. So it wasn't seen as such a terrible thing back then. Now we might think about that and think, well, that shows how much more civilized we are than those ancient Greeks or ancient Romans. Or we might say, well, it shows that maybe this idea that killing a baby or letting it die deliberately, we think of that as like a moral absolute, but maybe it's not as morally absolute as we think it is. So I mean, I just want to throw that out there as a possibility. All right. Finally, in terms of these kind of the three things we look at, and so what about punishment? Oops. Well, I think it's going to kind of vary. I mean, generally, I mean, punishment is something that we think of as a state doing to offenders. And so there's a moral question about like, is the death penalty justified? Is imprisonment justified? That sort of thing. So it seems to be that's more to do with government. And as I've already kind of spent some time doing, it seems like moderate moral egoism is not really kind of saying much about how a government should be run or what policies a government should have. So I think probably moderate moral egoism is going to say, well, it's going to be silent on that issue. It's not going to have much to say at all. All right. So hopefully by this stage, you have a pretty good idea about what moderate moral egoism is. You see its strengths and weaknesses. I want to kind of make a brief detour into Epicureanism, which we haven't kind of really mentioned much about, but is worth saying a little bit about, and in connection with moral egoism. So Epicurus was an ancient philosopher. He was 341 to 230, so he was after Aristotle, but not that long after Aristotle. Epicurus was from an Athenian family, and he moved around a bit. He developed a school of philosophy. He had followers. He's especially known for having his school was called the Garden, and it was sort of near Athens, not far from Athens, but it was a little remote. And he and his followers lived there for over 20 years. Sometimes it was described as a commune. Something seems like Epicurus. These days we might think of Epicurus as a kind of hippie. He's like he's sort of dropping out from the rest of society and just living life a life that he considered to be kind of happy. So here is his main ideas. He's very much against kind of the supernatural. He's not interested in making sacrifices to the gods or worrying about what the gods think. He says the gods have no role in human life. He's very much a kind of he's an interesting thinker for the ancient times because he's he thinks the world is just made of matter and stuff follows the laws of science. So in some ways he has a very kind of secular view of the world. He doesn't think there's all this supernatural stuff. He doesn't believe in religion. He's very critical of religion and superstition. He thinks religion and superstition make people unhappy and that they lead their lives in irrational ways. He doesn't think that's good. He thinks that we should just use rational thought to be more happy. And he thinks the main goal of life is to be happy. So he thinks that morality is not real as a kind of something that's pre-existing in the world, because all that really exists in the world is just atoms and kind of science. He thinks really morality is an invention which is meant to make society run more smoothly. And as an invention, it could be a useful thing to have. So one thing Epicurus is especially famous for arguing is that it's wrong or it's a mistake to fear death. And his argument is roughly that he says death is nothing to us, since when we exist our death is not, and when our death occurs we don't exist. Therefore there's never any reason to fear death. I mean, I think basically his view is that all these religious superstitions don't make any sense. You shouldn't be worrying about what's going to happen to you when you die, and so you should just focus on your life, and being anxious about your death is just going to make your life worse. So don't worry about your death. Obviously, you want to live it. You want to lead a sensible life. You don't want to be like taking all sorts of risks. That's going to make your life shorter. But you shouldn't be kind of leading a very anxious life. So what he really argues for is a moderate life. He says that if you lead a life of excess, it's going to be bad because it will catch up on you in the end. If you're he thinks you should stick to plain food and drink, because like if you eat lots of fancy food or if you drink lots of alcohol, that's going to be bad for you. The most important thing in life is to avoid pain. We might kind of wonder about whether he's right about, let's say, plain food and drink. You might say having a nice fancy meal with lots of fatty stuff and lots of kind of sugar is occasionally really nice. And so you might say, well, so long as you only do those things occasionally, it's fine. And he'd probably say, well, okay, sure. His main point is don't get hooked on things which are unnecessary to you, because that's going to make your life worse. Certainly, like addictions, people get addicted to all sorts of things, and they always make your life worse. So make sure you don't get hooked. His main message is that you have the ability to make your own life better. So in some ways, he's a very optimistic thinker. He says, like, it's within your power to make your life better. Now, one of the things which is especially interesting for us and important for us we've been thinking about egoism is his idea about friendship. He says, really, one of the most important things about a happy life is to have good friends. If you want to lead a happy life, you have to have friends. If you don't have friends, you're going to be miserable. And so the life in the garden, it seemed like that's why I kind of sort of like call it like a hippie life. It's like we should all just love each other and avoid hate and have friends you can really rely on. That's a happy life. So he thinks friendship is really essential. Now, generally, if you think about what does he say about being nice to others, he says that it connects with what I was saying before about how we're interconnected. Being nice to others makes your life better. So although he didn't put it this way, being an asshole does not make your life better. So he thinks that, and he says, like, well, why not? Why shouldn't you commit crime? Because, well, if you commit crimes, you're going to be worried about getting caught, and you're going to be all anxious, or you might actually get caught, and then you're going to be punished. And he thinks, yeah, we make agreements, make contracts with others that help our lives. So he says, like, really, if you want to lead a happy life, you need to lead a peaceful life. So like cheating on other people, hurting other people, ultimately is not going to make your life better. It's going to backfire. It's going to be bad for you. So you might ask, like, well, what about, if you're thinking about his recommendations, is he right about that? If you're the kind of person who lies and cheats, can you still lead a happy life? It seems like there's all sorts of people in the news who do that a lot, and they look like they're happy. So maybe he's wrong about that. You shouldn't be lying and cheating, or maybe we might want to say to him, it's only bad if it's going to if you're likely to get caught. The secret is to actually be good at cheating or to be good at stealing. Then you're not going to get caught and you'll be fine. But I think Epicurus is going to say, well, you're fooling yourself if you think you can be good at cheating and stealing. It all comes out eventually. So one question is like, well, what does he really think about morality? Does he think it's good to be? Does he really believe in morality, or does he just think morality is like not real? And in some ways, his writing is kind of a bit hazy between moral egoism and just being a total anti-realist and not really believing in morality at all. In some ways, he seems to kind of. In some ways, he seems to be a moral anti-realist. In other ways, he seems to say it's good to be selfish. So in some ways, it seems like you can interpret him as being a kind of moderate moral egoist, but it's not totally clear that that's the only possible interpretation. Maybe he just doesn't believe in morality at all. Maybe he just says, like, we should just, it makes sense for us to be happy. We should aim to be happy, but he doesn't really believe that's a moral thing. It's just that's what we should do. So there's a haziness there. Certainly, I mean, the main thing he says, like, he thinks the world is this kind of scientific, the world is a physical thing. He doesn't believe in all the gods. He says stuff like, well, the gods may exist, but they don't care about us. Whether he really believed in them or not, or whether he was just kind of talking about the gods because he didn't want the rest of the ancient Greeks to kind of gang up on him is not totally clear. Um, so there's a bit debates about how to interpret him, but I'm suggesting that we can take his sort of view and interpret it as a kind of moderate moral egoism. Right. So that leads to one of the big debates that were about Epicureans back in those days and still goes on today. So the question is, if you're an Epicurean and you just care about happiness, then can you be a good friend? So the basic idea, the basic question is, um, if you really what you really care is about yourself, then are you going to be a good friend? So it seems like Epicureanism is basically fundamentally egoistic, and it says that everything you do should ultimately be motivated by your own self-interest and your pursuit of pleasure. But can you really be a good friend if you just care about yourself? I mean, if you have a friend and you think your friend just really cares about themselves, then you might say that you don't really care about your friend at all. So what should we say about that? Well, certainly it's helpful to make the distinction, which we've made at various points before, between instrumental and intrinsic value. So you can easily say from an Epicurean point of view that you care about your friend because your friend is instrumentally useful to you. So the reason you care about your friend is like having a friend makes you happier, and that's the reason why you care about your friend. In that case, you care about your friend instrumentally. So it seems like at least on one interpretation of the of Epicureanism, Epicureans really don't care about their friends for themselves. They just care about their friends selfishly. So they don't really truly love their friends. They just really love themselves and are sort of using their friend. Other people have interpreted Epicureanism as saying, no, like actually that's a misunderstanding of Epicureanism. And you can actually truly love your friend. You can truly love another person in an unselfish way, and that they can have really true friendships, because actually that's what the secret is to leading a happy life. Truly, like that kind of loving somebody else without any sort of conditions on it, just you love somebody else for themselves. That's actually the secret to happiness. And if you can't do that, you're not really going to be truly happy. So some people have argued that you can actually kind of defend true friendship from an Epicurean point of view. I guess one sort of compromise position would be to say that you have an integrated approach. You could say that Epicurean friendship is both self-regarding and other-regarding. You care both for yourself and you truly love your friend, and you say there's not actually a conflict between those two things. You can say, like, you initially value your friend when you first make the friendship, because you say, yeah, like you like your friend because they make you laugh, they make you feel good, and that sort of thing. So initially you like your friend for the benefits they provide you, but then over time you genuinely start to love your friend for themselves in an unselfish way. So that might be a way to kind of like bridge the gap between the two different views and kind of reconcile the kind of the egoistic part with the idea that true friendship has to be unselfish and has to be kind of really caring about your friend for themselves.